we now have this keyword that's coming through that we can work with inside of our views. So it's time to actually get the data from the database, validate that it's actually there, and then do something different. So back into our views, I'm going to work specifically in the function-based view for now because the function-based view and the class-based view get method are virtually the exact same. I'll explain the difference shortly, but let's go ahead and just work in here. The first thing I want to do is I want to actually import the shortcode itself or the model itself. So from models, import cur URL. And the cur URL is the model class, of course. So we can say object equals to cur URL.objects.get, and we're already passing in the shortcode. So in our model, we can actually look for that particular shortcode. So going back in there, we'll do shortcode equals to shortcode. And then what we can do is return, instead of format being shortcode, we'll just do object.url. So we're going to assume that this object exists, and then we're going to return back the URL, and it's just going to say hello URL. Now if we refresh in here, let's save it and go to A instead of B, we get this does not exist value. Right? So this is an exception that would cause your actual app to kind of run into errors, right? At least for this particular shortcode. I think we had one called ABC123. No, we did not. So let's actually go into the admin and take a look at the different shortcodes we had. Oh, I think at one point we had ABC123, but we don't now. I called it new admin in one of the URL examples, but I'm going to change it back to admin just so we're all on the same page as far as that goes. I click on this and I'm going to go ahead and grab the Google one. Put that in here, press enter, and now it gives me back that object, right? So I used the proper shortcode and it gave me back that object. But we need to do something with this does not exist. So there's a lot of different ways on how we can actually handle this. Inside of our views, we can do this try block, and that's object equals to that get function. So we can say this, and then we can run an exception, and I'll just say except, and this is for every sort of thing, and I'll just say object equals to cur url.objects.all, and then we'll just do first, so as in the first one in there. And that right there will then replace that error. Oh, we want to get rid of that line at 11 because the try block is here. Replace that error, and that's what happens. So what just happened was it put the code inside of a try block, and it caught all exceptions, any kind of exception, and then it was going to do that specifically. This is okay, it works, but it's not the best method. Another method would be QS, as in query set, get url.objects.filter now, and we'll do shortcode __ I exact equals to shortcode. That is, the shortcode that's being passed is exactly the other shortcode, or is exactly what this shortcode is. Capitalized, lowercase, it doesn't matter. So if I did .upper, we'll see what that does in a second. And then I'll say if qs.exists, so if the query set has anything in there, then we can say object equals to qs.first. So just like what we did here, this is a way to get the first item inside of that query set. And actually with this query set, we can also say and qs.count equals to 1, because really we only want 1. Now this is a much better way to call get when we're not positive about the shortcode or that it even exists, but we don't want to have to run the try exception block. So this is just a little bit better there for that specifically. And we can see this if I come back and refresh, I get that same join CFE, and that's because of this right here. So I'm going to comment that out, save it and refresh, and it says local variable object reference before assignment. So that has to do with this. So I'll just do object now, I'll just do object _ URL equals to none. And then now down here, if it actually exists, object URL equals to object.url. So using this variable now instead and paste that there. So I refresh and I get none. If I grab that one from the URL that we already used, that shortcode, we press enter, and now actually brings back that URL. Okay, so that's all right too. This is if we wanted to have some sort of default. there's yet another thing, and that is it's going to be a shortcut called get object or 404. So we're going to come in and import get underscore object or 404. That is, get whatever the object is or raise a 404 error. This is probably the best one if we don't want to have a default action or another action that would happen if it didn't exist, except for a 404 error. So let's see what I mean by this. And I'll say object equals to get object or 404. I put in the class that we're going for, and that's cur URL. And then I put in the name of the actual query that we're trying to make, or we could just do the name of the field, and we can set that equal to the past field or the argument. That is, this shortcode is this one. This has to do with the field itself. So again, if I change this to ABC, this would be ABC, and then I would have to change this to ABC as well. All right, so hopefully that part makes sense. But anyway, so let's change that back to shortcode, and this is now the best way to get our object, at least for what we're about to do. And again, I'm going to have to do something like this, and we'll comment this out for a second, save it, refresh in here. Google's still coming through, but if I put something else, it now gives me a page not found. It wasn't the exception error like we saw before. It is now just page not found. Now, this is good and bad. The reason it's good is because if something's not found, that's what it's going to do. It's going to render your page not found template, which we'll talk about later. But it also allows you to just have 2 lines of code, or really, we don't actually need that same sort of URL function. We can bring this back to object.url and comment this out. That's now 2 lines in this function. We refresh in here, and it's still doing the same thing, right? So if I copy this, pasted it in here, it's still bringing all that stuff back. This is probably the preferred method long term. However, again, the big caveat here is if we wanted to have something else happen other than that 404 error, we could do those other messages that we just talked about. I just want the 404 error to happen. I want them to know that the URL shortener has no idea where you're trying to go, so it's going to raise that 404 error. This is for many, many other reasons too, but it's kind of like the standard thing when you see on a website. When somebody goes somewhere that doesn't exist, this is what the error is going to be. So I'll leave that other stuff in there just for your own notes. It will be deleted later, but now that we've got this, I can actually come in here and copy this exact same line and bring it into my class-based view. This is something that class-based views are all about. And this right here is the get method. So when we click on a link, that is called the get method. You can also see this in our terminal, that it's going to show you that there was a get call. I can do it several times, so I refreshed it several times, and we see that there's this get call in here. So each one of these is that get method. If we go into our terminal, and let's go back into this and do add a new URL, I'm going to just say http cfe blog/2, and I'll just hit save and continue. I can now look at my terminal, and I see that there was a post method handled, or a post method that actually happened. So that's the biggest difference between function-based views and class-based views. Class-based views, you have to explicitly write the method you want to handle. So in this case, I am now having it so my other class-based view, or this class-based view, can actually handle a post method. We're not going to test that specifically, but this right here is how you'd handle a post method, where the function-based view will handle get and post methods, or in fact, any method by default. So we can print out the request.method. We can print that out at any time, or sorry, lowercase method. So request method, we can print that out every single time. So if we go back in and refresh, we'll see that it says get. We also see the terminal itself logging that it was a get method. But if I press it out, we see get every time. Or I could obviously do something like print method is, and new line, save it, refresh, and we see, there it is, method is. Okay. So that's like essentially what's the difference, the main difference between that. Although class-based views are more portable, that means that we can move them around a little bit easier than function-based views. but they also take more code to write. So sometimes there's a trade-off for using them. So if we actually looked at this function-based view, and I'll leave the notes, I'll actually leave this as notes just all the way at the bottom into 3 quotes, and just so you guys can see that later. But I want to just clean this up so we can compare the two functions and the two ways of doing it. So assuming that this post is not here, we've got 4 lines here versus 3 lines. So the 3-line one is actually more efficient, and therefore you might end up doing something like that. But again, class-based views are more portable, so they both have their pluses and minuses. Okay, so we did a lot here, but we aren't quite there yet as far as how this shortener works. We were able to get the shortener, otherwise raise a 404 error. But now what we need to do is actually redirect them to the proper URL, whatever that may be. So if you have any questions on here, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.